Home war front. 2 postal workers are dead. U.S. officials say anthrax almost certainly the cause. Did more tainted letters enter the postal system? The U.S. Commando raid, what it was, and a frontline exclusive report on the Allied air attack that apparently hit the wrong side. A warning about the risks of fighting a ground war in Afghanistan. And the military casualty count begins in the war against terror.
This is the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather reporting from CBS News headquarters in New York.
Good evening. The number of deaths in America from inhaled anthrax has most likely risen to 3. Besides the previously known death of a Florida newspaper employee, U.S. health officials now say all signs indicate 2 Washington, D.C. area postal workers have died of the disease. Both worked at a postal facility that services Capitol Hill. And there are questions now about whether the government has in fact moved wisely, aggressively, and quickly to protect postal workers and the public from anthrax assassination attempts. CBS's Bob Schieffer begins our coverage. Bob?
Well, Dan, the news here just seems to get worse as you report 2 workers at the postal facility that receives congressional mail have died. 2 others there have confirmed inhalation anthrax, and 9 others at that facility are suspected of having it. At the White House, the new director of Homeland Security said anthrax almost certainly caused the deaths.
It is very clear that their symptoms are suspicious, and their deaths are likely due to anthrax.
The postal facility was closed, and thousands of workers are being bused to hospitals for testing. Their moods range from worried to angry.
I think we should have got tested last week, just right along with the folks up on the Hill.
We've been given rubber gloves, we've been given masks, and we've been instructed to be extra careful.
Several dozen congressional staffers being treated for the anthrax exposure that occurred when the substance was found in a letter sent to Senator Daschle's office are doing well. But the anthrax inhaled by the postal workers was apparently more concentrated and deadly.
This is a different day. We have multiple postal workers where we have suspicions and 2 confirmed cases of inhalation anthrax. This is a different day.
The postal workers came from this facility where experts say high-speed mail sorting machines could put them at greater risk than those who receive anthrax in the mail.
So if there's a tear in the envelope, or if the system itself is tearing the envelope, that material, that powder is being generated, is generating a small particle aerosol.
Technicians are still testing congressional offices for anthrax after a trace was discovered this weekend in a 3rd congressional building. Those buildings and other congressional offices remain closed, but the Capitol itself is open. Congressional leaders had hoped to open those offices tomorrow, but tonight they were told testing is still going on. It won't be possible. It may be weeks before some of the buildings open. Congress is going to get some temporary space at the General Accounting Office, but in any case, the Congress will officially convene tomorrow. Dan?
Bob Schieffer reporting live from Capitol Hill. U.S. postal officials vowed today the mail will go through, and they announced new steps to protect postal workers and the public. CBS's John Roberts has late details on what is and is not being done. John?
Dan, the presidentially appointed Postal Board of Governors today voted to spend up to $1 billion to institute new safety procedures at mail sorting facilities. But until new machines can be brought in to effectively neutralize the bioterrorism threat, those procedures will be decidedly low-tech.
The immediate line of defense will be increased vigilance. Every postal worker will become another pair of eyes looking for anything suspicious. Maintenance procedures will be changed. The use of compressed air to clean machines will be stopped immediately.
The Postal Service has used a system where we blow out dust from our machines, so we are revising those procedures as we speak.
Authorities will also pay particularly close attention to any medical problems among postal workers to identify patterns of infection and potential hot zones in postal facilities. And officials are actively looking into new ways to sanitize the mail, exploring ultraviolet and cobalt radiation. But much of that technology is cumbersome and may require shipping letters and packages to special facilities as an interim delivery step.
With 680 million pieces of mail traveling through 350 sorting facilities every day, ensuring the safety of postal workers will be an enormous task. So immediately, the Postal Service plans to focus the inception of new technologies at facilities it fears faces the biggest threat. Dan?
Live at the White House, John Roberts. And then there are the questions about the so far unsuccessful investigation into where all this anthrax is coming from and who may be responsible for the attacks. For the latest on that tonight, we take you to correspondent Jim Stewart in our CBS News Washington Bureau. Jim?
Dan, federal investigators don't know yet how the additional Washington postal workers were infected, but they are leaning toward the theory that perhaps another yet undiscovered anthrax letter may have made its way through the main postal sorting facility where thousands of undelivered letters are now being carefully examined. Thus far, just 3 confirmed anthrax letters have been recovered, 1 to Senator Tom Daschle in Washington, and 2 to New York, 1 to NBC anchor Tom Brokaw, the other to the New York Post. The source of skin anthrax cases discovered at CBS and ABC headquarters in New York are presumed to have been contaminated letters that were discarded. And still, U.S. officials say there is a high probability that just one individual is behind the whole thing. Why? Because a strain of anthrax common to the United States was in all the letters, because all came in the same boxy type printing, and all were mailed from Trenton, New Jersey. And just to make sure that none of the 19 dead hijackers involved in the September the 11th attacks was involved, FBI agents have re-examined all of their personal items and residences and still cannot find even the hint of a trace of anthrax. And there's still no sign either of any missing anthrax at laboratories and universities in the United States, and no reports thus far of any missing overseas. It all keeps leading back to the same conclusion. Someone with skill in this country is behind the attacks. But who is still a mystery. Dan?
In Washington, Jim Stewart. It cannot be emphasized often enough. Anthrax is not contagious. Skin anthrax is plenty dangerous, but most dangerous, the quickest, is inhaled anthrax. Both can be, and in most cases are, successfully treated when diagnosed early. On the military front of the war on terror, U.S. combat aircraft pounded Taliban targets in Afghanistan for a 16th day. And CBS News national security correspondent David Martin reports military analysts examined the results of Friday's 2-pronged raid by U.S. Army Rangers.
U.S. officials say leaders of the Taliban appear stunned by the ease with which American commandos were able to operate inside Afghanistan. As these pictures were being transmitted live back to the Pentagon, Special Operations Forces parachuted onto an airfield outside the Taliban stronghold of Kandahar. Another commando team hit the bunker of the supreme leader of the Taliban, Mullah Omar, although neither he nor anybody else worth capturing was there.
We did not take any prisoners or bring out any detainees for interrogation.
The commandos took away documents that will now be analyzed for intelligence that can be used on future raids. Today, the Taliban displayed the remains of a helicopter they claim to have shot down. It clearly is part of an American-made helicopter, but Defense Secretary Rumsfeld flatly denied any shoot-down.
The Taliban have said they have shot down at least 2 helicopters, which is false. They have not.
Rebel soldiers fighting the Taliban are now being aided both by American Special Forces troops working with them on the ground and by U.S. warplanes striking the Taliban front lines. The American jets are picking off individual tanks and dropping cluster bombs designed to wipe out as many troops as possible. Many of the strikes are just north of Kabul and outside a key airfield at Mazar-e-Sharif, which the rebels need to take before winter sets in. But their progress is slow.
We think they're outnumbered for one reason, so that impacts how fast they can move.
Winter comes early to the mountains and will bring ground combat to a standstill. But that, of course, would not stop airstrikes.
The Muslim month of Ramadan also starts in November, but Secretary Rumsfeld has all but ruled out any chance that will force the U.S. to suspend its assault on the Taliban. Dan?
David Martin's live report from the Pentagon. The recent expansion of the U.S.-led air campaign in Afghanistan to include attacks on Taliban troop concentrations in the field was welcomed by fighters of the anti-Taliban United Front. But as CBS's Jim Axelrod reports from the front lines north of Kabul, In war, there is no escaping the risk of hitting the wrong target.
The American fighter jets were plain as day in the afternoon sky, repeatedly diving and hitting Taliban targets on the front line near the Bagram Air Base, a prized position of enormous strategic importance that both the Taliban and the United Front want to control. We were on the front line watching with a group of United Front Mujahideen who were celebrating the hits on their enemy when all of a sudden the cheering stopped.
Oh, that's ours. That's our front line.
The commander said 2 United Front positions were hit in an area where United Front forts and Taliban forts are less than a quarter mile away from each other. It's so close.
This is not ours, yes.
Yours and theirs, so close.
So close, yeah. This side of the road is Taliban, this side ours.
While more planes flew, the commander tried to make radio contact with the United Front Mujahideen in those mud forts.
Musafir Tawheed.
He never got through. Tonight, there is still no word on casualties.
They hit your positions.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Okay. They should take care about it.
They should be more careful?
Yeah, they should be more careful about our position.
The commander told us that United Front troops supplied a list of targets to the Air Force for attacks in the area. If it turns out the wrong bases were hit, then today's events underscore the risks if the United States doesn't have its own personnel on the ground here to coordinate airstrikes. Jim Axelrod, CBS News, Jabal Sarraj, Afghanistan.
As the fighting goes on, the tide of Afghan refugees is rising along the border with Pakistan. After allowing many to cross in recent days, the Pakistani government today moved to stop the flow. This followed an incident yesterday that began with refugees pelting Pakistani guards with stones and ended with a cross-border stampede. Next here on the CBS Evening News, Eye on America. Special ops, special grief. Home bases for elite commandos mourn 2 who died far from home.
When that pastrami on rye catches up with me, hot.
Their motto is Rangers Lead the Way. Elite Army commandos trained for airborne raids and lightning strikes. But at Fort Benning, Georgia, home of the 75th Ranger Regiment, today what was sudden was the sense of grief.
The loss of Rangers deeply saddened all of us.
Over the weekend, 2 Rangers who trained at Fort Benning, Specialist John Edmonds and Private Christopher Stonecipher, were killed in Pakistan. They were riding on a Black Hawk helicopter that crash-landed trying to support a weekend commando raid. Today in Wyoming, Edmonds' family was grieving too.
You do not expect to have to wait on your son to come home from overseas so that you can bury him.
Rangers typically train 48 weeks a year for the sort of raid they executed on Saturday in southern Afghanistan, often supported by units of Army Special Forces. Over the weekend, they sent a message to the Taliban in copies of photos they left behind, showing New York City firefighters and a caption that read, "Freedom endures." And the raid itself sent a more menacing message.
It's that we can strike at will.
Mark Boyad, a retired Special Forces commander, says the Taliban can expect more of the same.
Every time they turn around, if they take their eyes off of their backside, in come the lightning raids. Their whole decision cycle is broken. They're in a total react rather than be proactive mode, and I think that's exactly where they are now.
To the Pentagon, using small units for these hit-and-run raids will also help keep U.S. casualties low. But as the weekend's helicopter crash proved, even for elite troops, commando action involves high risk. For Eye on America, I'm Mark Strassman at Fort Bragg, North Carolina.
The U.S. ambassador to Israel today delivered a demand that the Israeli government withdraw its forces from Palestinian-controlled parts of the West Bank. There was fighting there all weekend. The Israelis say their tanks will stay until Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat delivers those responsible for last week's assassination of an Israeli cabinet minister. In contrast to the Middle East, there was some new hope today for the shaky peace process in Northern Ireland. That would be thanks to Gerry Adams, the political leader who supports the aims of the Irish Republican Army. For the first time, Adams publicly urged the IRA to begin disarming as required by the 3-year-old peace deal. A supersonic Concorde jet flew from London to New York today with 100 British Airways employees on board. It was the first such flight since an Air France Concorde crash near Paris last year killed 113 people. Regular Concorde service is set to resume early next month. Next here on CBS, the fierce fighters of Afghanistan. A former commando who knows them well has a warning for the American public and U.S. troops.
It seems like only yesterday. When I started skating at 8 years old, I never thought I'd experience
against the Taliban. American commanders might consider the warnings of a man who calls himself Tom Carew.
It's a different ball game. You're going to find it hard to tie them down. You're just going to be stonewalled all the time.
That's him with his face blacked out. A former member of the SAS, Great Britain Special Forces. Is that you?
Yeah, it's me driving here.
He spent 2 years in the early 80s training Afghan rebels to fight the Soviet Union.
It's tough land?
Yeah, it's very tough. It's hard, it's dry, it's arid, and yeah, you never know where they're going to pop up from, you know?
Which is why this veteran of war in Afghanistan believes U.S. troops cannot act conventionally. It's a job for special forces requiring the support of the anti-Taliban United Front. Global superpower is worthless without a little local knowledge.
It's not just a little mountain range, it's like thousands of square kilometers of it. It's full of holes in the ground where they have ammunition buried for emergencies. There are caves everywhere. You're going to get bogged down and you'll never contain the enemy. Gone and they're back behind you.
Asked if there's anything more brutal than the Afghan landscape, Carew says absolutely. The mindset of an Afghan warrior. It's a chilling picture he paints of the troops Americans might encounter. Forget the Geneva Convention. These are guerrillas who truly take no prisoners.
When you're captured, you are going to be mutilated. It's the way it is. It's the way it is. Just the way...
Arms, legs, cut off?
Well, not so much cut off, they just open you up. They all have these knives and they will just open you up.
The lucky ones, says Carew, are the ones who die quickly.
What kind of opponents would they make?
Well, they're deadly. I mean, they're really deadly. I think it's probably the worst enemy you'll ever come across. They are really ferocious.
This warning from a soldier who's seen guerrillas in a dozen countries, yet remains most haunted by those he fought with in Afghanistan. Jim Axelrod, CBS News, Jabal Sarraj, Afghanistan.
The U.S. Senate has already said yes. Now the House is getting ready to approve the first U.S. war bonds since World War II. The money could be used for any government expenditures. While acknowledging the patriotic intent of these bonds, the Treasury Department insists Americans would give the country a bigger boost by simply spending money to help the economy. The U.S. International Trade Commission ruled today that the American steel industry has been hurt significantly by cheap imported steel. This could lead to new U.S. tariffs on the imports. A new sign of continuing hard times for the U.S. economy, the index of leading indicators fell in September for the second straight month. Wall Street shrugged that off. Stocks closed higher today, including a triple-digit gain for the Dow.
I'm every man.
We close tonight with a few words about men and women ready to give their lives to protect their fellow Americans, and some who did. A new class of more than 300 probationary New York firefighters was sworn in today by Mayor Rudy Giuliani.
Just think of why people respect you so much. Because you're willing to do something that most other people just wouldn't even consider doing.
343 firefighters died doing what most other people wouldn't consider doing, racing into the burning World Trade Towers. In the smoldering rubble of the towers today, another victim recovered. Rescue workers paused and stood at attention, forming an honor line, saluting the flag-draped body as a procession carried it away. Confirmed death toll now, 473. More than 4,400 still missing. At Arlington Cemetery, the first casualty of America's war on terror was laid to rest. Air Force Sergeant Evander Andrews of Solon, Maine, killed in a forklift accident on the Arabian Peninsula. Andrews loved farming and trucks, and cooking. They say he made the best pecan pie in town. Before he left for the war, Andrews told his wife and 4 children, "I'll come home." But he added, "God's in control." Lest we forget. And that's part of our world tonight. Dan Rather reporting for the CBS Evening News. Good night.
For news 24 hours a day, CBS.com on the internet and on our interactive partner, America Online, at keyword CBS News.
Keeping America safe. The cost of all that extra security. Tomorrow. Experience CBS News.
Of the conflict, if you will, as so poignantly put by General Schwarzkopf, the difference between the Iraqi soldiers and the U.S. soldiers was spirit.
Then, following September 11th, Greenwood again stepped to the forefront.
Well, the first thing I have to do is help in some way. So I sent Mayor Giuliani's office in New York a telegram and saying, is there anything I can do? Please call. I recognized immediately then what God Bless USA meant at this particular time, because we were suddenly performing in front of thousands of people who needed to be uplifted. I'm a little hesitant to be quite jubilant when I sing it, or, you know, I mean, I want to have people be proud, but at the same time, we have to regroup and redefine ourselves in this particular conflict and a war that we can't identify with the government. And so USA, as my anthem, as my family's anthem, and as an anthem for America, puts a great responsibility on me, I believe. And I accept that, and I try to do as much as I can to raise the confidence level in our government.
From sea to shining sea, from Detroit down to Houston.
November the 7th, we'll bring you Lee along with a number of other stars in our countdown to country from 7 to 8, and the awards ceremony begins at 8 o'clock. Lee says he's working on other projects, including some patriotic songs, and will continue to tour the country. He is at high demand right now.
I bet. Okay. Well, do we have time for weather? Yes, we do.
Let me tell you real quick, we've got a tornado watch that's in effect out to the west. Doesn't affect us just yet, but that's the storm system there we're watching, and it's coming our way. So later on for tonight, showers and thunderstorms. The overnight low will drop to 54 degrees. Tomorrow's high at 62, and then temperatures will drop as we head toward the weekend.
All right.
We appreciate you joining us here for Volunteer News at 6.
The CBS Evening News with Dan Rather's up next. We'll see you back here at 7 o'clock.